Okay, so in this video we're going to take a look at hyperbolas that are centered on the origin. Right, so here is our center. Now, in the module where we went over the ellipse, what kind of guided what the major and minor axes were was the value of A and B. Right, if A was larger, then that meant that was where the where the major axis was, and if B was larger, that's where the major axis was. Right, now in this case, what's going to guide where the and we don't call it the major or minor, we call it the transverse axis and the conjugate axis. Right, so what's going to guide that is where on which side of the minus sign the variable is. Right, so we're going to keep A and B in place for these hyperbolas. And then what will happen is we'll switch around the x squared and the y squared, right? So when we have the x squared to the left of the minus sign, right? So it's going to open along the horizontal, okay? And then the transverse axis, so this is the case in this case here, the length of, so in all cases here, the length of the transverse axis is 2a. All right, and that's going to be this right here. So this is my transverse axis. Okay. And then along here, here's where we're going to have what we're going to call the conjugate axis. Okay. Alright, so we have our transverse axes and our conjugate axes. And again here the length of the conjugate axis is 2b. Alright. Okay. And here we see the coordinates. So here, these are the vertices. Right, the ones right here. Here's a vertex, here's a vertex. And then the co-vertices are here. Okay, now another thing that we're going to have here are asymptotes that kind of guide where our hyperbola is going to go. Here, and the asymptotes go through the origin and this little box here that I drew here. So they're kind of the diagonals of this box here. So here we'll have okay, and again here this point is A comma B, and then this point is negative A B. So you can kind of, it goes through the origin, so you can already see, all right, the equations for these. Change in x, change in y over change in x. Right, so from 0, 0 to b and a, so b over a, that's where that comes from. And then here, this one would be negative. Okay. All right. And then here, all we have left here is, since it is opens along the horizontal, our hyperbola would be these two curves here. Right, the rest of these dotted lines, they're not part of the graph, right? They're just kind of there as guidelines as to where the graph goes, right? But this is our actual graph here in purple here. All right, and again, the vertex are here and here. And then we also have foci, similar, that are to, in this case, to the left here of minus A and to the right here of positive A. So this is a focus, and there's one on this side as well. And same as before, we have a way to connect the A, B, and C. And for this particular hyperbola, right, now it's going to be C squared is going to be A squared plus B squared. Okay, now in the case where we have here the hyperbola where we have y squared over a squared minus x squared over b squared equals to 1. Right, so now we switch around what goes to the left of the minus. Right, so if I draw what that would look like, okay, so in this case, what will happen here is that this A is now attached to the Y. So my A will be here, and then minus 0 minus A here. Right, so this will now be my transverse axis here. I think of it similar to our major axes. So here. And notice that in both of these cases, there's no requirement for A to be greater than B or B greater than A to have the transverse axis. Right, so transverse axis is always the value that is to the left of the minus sign. Okay, so that'll be my transverse axis, and our conjugate axis would be this value here. So whatever value B is, so this will be negative B0, B0. And this is our conjugate axis. All right, and now we can draw our rectangle here. All right, where the diagonals here are our asymptotes. And now here we do switch around the y. So here the change in y would be A, change in x would be B, and then this would be negative A over bx. All right, so those would be the equations of my asymptotes, and my foci, one focus would be here, and my other focus would be here. All right, and now we have our parabola here that opens along the vertical. Okay, and similar to before, right? All that relevant information remains the same. The length of the transverse axis is 2a. The length of the conjugate axis is 2b, and the way that we relate a, b, the values of a, b, and c is the same. All right, so that doesn't change, right? And that is for when we have the transverse axis along the vertical. In this case, the vertical being the y-axis. We'll take a look later what happens when I move off center, right? And again, it's just really a shift of all these values, A and B, but the length of the axes, transverse and conjugate, would remain the same. All right, thank you.